Hi there, it's Lezli. Thanks for joining us for our On the Yard edition of Impolite Conversation, where we explore race, culture, and societal issues through the lens of HBCU students. On the Yard happens every Friday.
Hi, I'm today's co-host, Nava. For those of you who attended or are currently students at HBCUs, you know that there are a number of ties that bind us to our respective institutions, through traditions, history, etc. My sister attended boarding school for high school. Oftentimes, when I talk to her about her experience, I find that there are many similarities between the culture of boarding school and our experience at Spelman. Today, we're going to demystify New England boarding school culture, as well as explore the parallels between the HBCU experience and the New England boarding school experience. I'm excited to explore this with today's guests who attend Spelman and Morehouse. I'll allow you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I am Levene Harvell, a rising senior computer science major from South Orange, New Jersey, and I attend Spelman College.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy Stansel. I am a rising junior at Morehouse College. I am an economics major, and I currently live in New York City.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, for our repeat listeners, Zuri is obviously very familiar to you because she is our co-host. So she's joining us today on the other side.
I think it's going to be a great conversation, so I'm excited.
What boarding school did you attend, and why did you want to attend boarding school?
I attended Miss Porter's School for Girls in Farmington, Connecticut. I decided to go to boarding school because that was not my first time going to a boarding school at all. So I think my previous experience with a boarding school, I really enjoyed that experience. I was in South Africa, and I think I just really enjoyed the boarding school environment. So I guess it's a little bit about why I decided to attend a boarding school for high school.
I went to the Hotchkiss School in Lakeville, Connecticut. I grew up watching Harry Potter, Zoe 101. And so I really just kind of wanted that experience. Ever since I was little, I just always wanted to try out going to boarding school. When we moved to New York, I was applying to high schools, and they were like, well, why don't you add these boarding schools to your list? And I was super excited. And then I fell in love with Hotchkiss. So that's why I went.
What are some funny questions that people ask you?
I get, were you a bad kid? That's probably my number one question. Some people ask, well, what was it like living with your teachers? Or like, did you live with your teachers?
I would say definitely, were you a problem child, a bad kid? What is it like to have a dorm mom? Do you get to go to parties? I'm trying to think of what else was like a pretty common question. Oh, how far was the nearest boys' school to you? Are you in the middle of the cornfield somewhere? And I actually wasn't. Like I was. My school was within a small city, like suburb within Connecticut. So it wasn't terrible, but could have been worse.
Nava mentioned that she noticed parallels between the Spelman experience. And Zuri, you've mentioned it too, as it relates to some of the things that you shared with her as it relates to the culture of Miss Porter's. Have either of you, well, Zuri, you have, but I'd like for you to share. And Jimmy, have you noticed parallels between your boarding school experience and the culture of Morehouse?
For my education, I was at an all-girls boarding school. I'm now at an all-women's college. So I would say there is definitely a lot more that makes it similar in terms of traditions and the way the alumni really want to give back to their school and how connected they feel to their school. Like when you get your ring to become an old girl, like what that experience is like in the spring, doing other spring traditions, running around to other people's ring ceremonies. So that acclimation of culture in addition to education, I think really does affect what kind of experience you have.
I definitely agree with the similarities. The similarities for me reside in the alumni and their desire to give back to the college, whether it's financially or, come back and teach or work there or around on campus. Also, these are the only two schools that I've ever been to that have had school songs that they require you to learn within the first week. It's sort of similar to like right now. I noticed because I have some freshmen in my history class, a lot of them, I can tell, never went through the NSO Morehouse acclimation. there's a lot of stuff that we have to do. And I can tell that they just haven't been through it. And that's because of COVID, right? And so it's like, you can see the difference in people. At Hotchkiss, I think it's like a school spirit thing that I find very similar at HBCUs. Hotchkiss, people didn't really wear other boarding school clothing, whereas, and in HBCUs, you don't really wear other schools' clothing. Whereas I've seen my friends at like Princeton wear Harvard hoodies or something like that.
Nava, I'm curious because you attended an independent school that was a day school. I'm sure that your high school had a song. Were you required to learn it? Did you feel the same sort of connectedness to the alumni? Did you feel that they wanted to pour into you and give back in the same way that Jimmy and Zuri are describing?
I would say not necessarily. I do think that was something that they were actively working on. I remember in my last year of high school, that was something that they were trying to do, like create some type of relationship between the alumni and the current students. Obviously, it didn't necessarily work because it was their first time attempting to do something like this. While we're on the topic of culture, there is a movie on Amazon Prime called Stella the Spades. This movie is set in a fictional boarding school in the Northeast, and there's a main character. She's a Black female named Selah. She's a senior in high school, and it's set around her senior spring. And the character is played by Levene. The movie dramatizes the underground organizations at the school. They're split up into 5 factions, as they call it. The 5 factions are the Bobbies, the Skins, the C's, the Prefects, and the Spades. And each of these factions have different things that they're in charge of. For example, the Bobbies run underground parties. The Skins control gambling on sports events. The C's will give you answers to tests and homework and help you on finals, things like that, for money, obviously. The Prefects keep the administration unaware of everything that's going on, and the Spades are in charge of the drugs and the alcohol, that kind of thing. And the Spades are considered the most powerful faction, and Selah is the head of that faction. Would you say that the movie, generally speaking, was an accurate depiction of boarding school culture?
I would say that in terms of how it feels to be at a boarding school, I was at an all-girls boarding school, so maybe Jimmy would be better to say how it is in terms of like co-ed. But I would say that there are like small similarities, like not super great, but I thought it did a pretty good job in terms of like, I remember doing stuff like that.
Like the signing out thing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At least for my school, seniors had, I would say, like the most status, or would be like the highest level in the hierarchy of whatever the factions would be. Within the senior class, there's factions and groups within that. There's the girls that live on campus and like live in the same senior dorms together. And then the girls that are day students that they don't live on campus. So that's a completely different relationship. And then everyone plays a sport. So then it's the sports that the school pours the most money into. Those girls, you know, a lot of people usually want to be friends with them. And then in terms of traditions, as seniors, there's a lot of positions that you get to fulfill for the first time. For example, there's a group on campus that's called Parallettes, that was the a cappella singing group, and the Nova 9, which is our government that's led by the senior class. Within that, people could have multiple positions that, depending on what that position was, like people were always trying to do things with you. And there are certain things that only seniors can do, like walk on senior grass. I would say actual day-to-day life is set up. It wouldn't be that divided in terms of what the groups were like, but there's definitely hierarchy.
Some of the scenes in the movie, for instance, there's a party scene where campus security comes and they all run and disappear. That is entirely accurate in my experience. I think that the organizations, like Nava said, were dramatized. I feel like they have a little bit more power in the show than they do in real life. For instance, at Hotchkiss, the factions are kind of all blended. You said senior grass. We also had a senior quad. It was a square of like 4 chairs and a table in the middle of the main hallway. The couches are like probably 50 years old and they're super comfortable, but like you're not allowed to be in senior quad unless you were invited by a senior, right? in my first couple of years, there'd be a teacher sitting there and I would want to talk to them. And then I would feel weird standing there, right? Because you're not supposed to be there. I have several friends who were like, y'all couldn't sit there? Why wouldn't you just sit there, you know?
Going back to what you said about the factions, rather than being one specific group that did this one thing, you said there are groups, but kind of like in the specific groups, rather than it being like one group that only does this. There are groups that do all of those things rather than being like one main one. And then those individual people in their groups are in charge of those things.
You described it well. That was basically what I wanted to get at. I don't think we had like a group of people who were keeping the faculty. Actually, I know we didn't have a group of people who were keeping the faculty out because the faculty knew everything.
Yeah, actually going back to what Jimmy said before about there not really being like a prefect faction, which is the group of people that keep the administration from knowing what's going on in the movie. Going back to that, can you explain what a prefect is and why you think that the director chose this faction to be responsible for keeping the administration unaware? And I know you said there wasn't really anything like anybody who specifically did that, but did you feel like there was some kind of similarity, whether at Miss Porter's or at Hotchkiss, of maybe someone who kind of did something similar or attempted to?
At Miss Porter's, we did not have prefects, but there were prefects at the boarding school that I attended when I was in middle school. Basically, what a prefect was somebody who was an upperclassman that usually lived in the dorm, and they were supposed to be helping the underclassmen students basically adjust to boarding school. It was a type of leadership position, essentially. But within Miss Porter's, we did not specifically have prefects. We had junior advisors, and every single dorm had at least 2 junior advisors.
I would definitely agree with Zuri there. I think that the closest thing that we would have to a prefect would be the proctors. And a proctor is basically like a college residential advisor, but for the dorms. So you'd have like 2 on each floor, and basically the proctors were the ones who sort of administered justice. So for instance, let's say you don't do your homework, right? Instead of going to like a dorm head, the proctor would be like, okay, you got to be in your dorm room from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. But the entire idea was to make it student run and create a close-knit relationship. In the movie, the administration was a little bit more not absent, but away from the school, whereas it wasn't really like that in practice. The adults would have been there.
Right.
Not at the parties, but like there in the dining hall and in the dorm. Yeah.
Close enough to like kind of figure out what's going on.
There's a scene in the movie where the Spades beat up a student in a secluded stairway. And I assume that it's due to failure to pay for product, right? Given that the Spades, what their faction handles. And then the next time you see him, he has a black eye, he has a busted lip, and he's lying to the headmaster. Which, by the way, Jesse Williams as that headmaster was hilarious. He was like 50 steps behind. He's like, these dang kids. Like, it's like he had no idea what was going on at his school. But anyway, so he's lying to the headmaster about how he got the bruises. Obviously, part of it was fear, right? But as the movie progresses, we see these interactions between faction heads that let us know that it doesn't matter what it is. You don't ever talk to administration about anything, even if it means being expelled, right? Because there's this student that they keep alluding to who had gotten expelled. And it seems like her situation could have been rectified if somebody had just basically explained the situation. Would you say that's pretty accurate in terms of this sort of unwritten rule that it's sort of social suicide that you would speak to adults?
I'm not sure about Hotchkiss, but I know that Miss Porter's is a 2-strike policy school. If you got caught doing something, depending on what it was and how many strikes you currently had, you were sent to disciplinary council, which was a student-led council that would make the decision and then let their decision be known to the administration so they can make the final decision. But like I said before, like it's a really small school and eventually everybody knows what everybody is doing, but it's about proof. My junior year, a bunch of the seniors got in trouble for something because a girl decided to basically take screenshots of a party that she wasn't invited to and let the administration know because,
Wait, she took pictures of a party because she didn't get invited?
yes. And she gave it to the administration and everything. And even to this day, nobody in her class like really talks to her.
What you said, it was a 2-strike policy. We actually had a no chance policy. So if you are ever caught in possession of alcohol or illegal paraphernalia or any of that, you were gone instantly. The social suicide, because you don't talk to administration, because once you're talking to administration about it, just like Zuri said, they either have the proof and you're probably going to be gone, or they don't have the proof and you just deny.
What are some things where you were like, wow, they didn't get a second chance? What were some things that people got expelled for or were asked to leave for?
Honestly, the way that it happens can be very traumatizing for the people who one it's happening to and the people that they're close to. And my own personal experience of having people that I know and that I'm friends with leave school is very hard. And in that scenario, I personally didn't believe that it deserved a expulsion. That's really as much detail as I can really give. If you get asked to leave or expelled from school, you're not allowed to come on campus until after your class graduates. So thinking about it in terms of like, oh, your friend is now being asked to leave. Who knows when you'll see them again? Like, you don't have a car, you're 15 years old, and then finding out that they can't even come visit you back on school. Not saying that they would want to, but they can't even come on school grounds. They can't see you graduate. They can't ever do the things with you that, you would want to be doing with your friends. School becomes your life when you go to boarding school. Like, that's where you eat dinner every night, where you eat breakfast, where you go to school, where all of your friends are, even the ones that are day students. So it's just knowing that now, like the place that I'm at 9 months out of the year, I wouldn't even be able to see you in that place. Like, it really sucks. I think that experience itself of like being asked to leave or being expelled or whatever it is very traumatizing to all of the students involved. Because I know for a disciplinary council, when you get in trouble, that's not like expulsion or anything like that. You usually have to do like a statement of a regret or like an apology to the campus. And then it's posted on a bulletin board for the entire campus to see.
Oh, wow. Oh, they did that at Hotchkiss too?
So for us, I want to say your statement, it goes on your record. So we had a scenario where this guy was involved in this whole thing, and then a proctor came in, and the proctor told the dorm what he was doing and what all the people in the room were doing. And then what happened was those people left him out and created a story. They said they weren't doing it, but then he said he was. Like, yeah, we did this, but there was no proof that they were doing it. And so since he admitted to it, he got expelled. And since their stories matched, it was like, now, technically, they all should have been expelled.
The entire experience of dealing with administration in a boarding school, I think it's very grueling. And especially as a person of color at a boarding school, that added layer of that, and, maybe whether or not that actually contributes to who's being expelled and how harsh their punishment was versus what they actually did and things like that.
Yeah, I would say in the movie, in Stella the Spades, talking about that girl, Selah, who you kind of find out later why she was expelled. They're being like kind of hush-hush about it. I think really emulates what it is that you're saying to a different degree. But you don't know. Like, that she was here and now she's not, but you don't necessarily know why. It's still open wounds for some people.
One of my best friends, he had to leave. I remember I was trying to, process it with my friends. And at the beginning, they were like, no, we're not talking about this. I don't want to talk about this. And it was kind of like, why don't you want to talk about this? Because at the time I wasn't acclimated into the culture. And he had a sister in the class, but he couldn't even come see us graduate because, like Zuri said, he's not allowed on campus. So he couldn't see his sister graduate. He couldn't see me graduate or any of our friends. We had the same sports, the same classes. Like, he was really close. And so it's like having someone like that just sort of removed. And then not only that, he lives on the other side of the country.
Which is like, distance is a real barrier once people are no longer at school. Like, these aren't people that live in your town or live in your state even. You will probably not see them if you guys are not at school. So it like sucks.
because you're so day-to-day life, you're in school and you're living it. Like you're doing homework at your dining hall or where you eat, for me at least, was in the same exact building. So it's all like meshed together. And so when you lose a part of that, the entire community feels it, even if you don't know the person.
I'm feeling stressed out about this. Were you living in a state of like, I don't want to call it anxiety, but just a state of I cannot mess up because if I do, I may be asked to leave or I may get expelled?
100%.
I mean, definitely.
For instance, like I've gotten in trouble because it was cold outside and I had on a hoodie in class. And I had on a tie underneath my hoodie, right? And I was wearing khakis, but I got in trouble for it. And they were like, take off your hoodie or you're getting a detention. And so what happens is like those Saturday night study halls, that's like the only time where you can sort of be free. And then for us, we had Saturday classes.
Some schools did that, yeah.
So if you got Saturday detention or Saturday study hall, you got like 3 hours of being off. And then Sunday you're doing work.
I feel like when you're at boarding school, obviously everybody's parents are not the same, but the things that you would get in trouble for, like maybe going to a party or having alcohol in your room, you would think that those are things you would get in trouble for. But then things like, oh, did you take an Uber and you were under 18? Do you have the permissions from your parents saying that you can go farther than campus? Things like that. Or did you wear sweatpants to class and you're not allowed to wear sweatpants to class? Breaking dress code will give you Saturday night study hall. And if you have a certain amount of Saturday night study halls, it goes in as a check. And then if you have a certain amount of checks, you have early curfew. The way that discipline was instilled within the school, you know, there are certain things at a point where you're like, I'm not even going to do this because it's not worth the trouble of going the extra effort to do that. Making sure that you're sort of on is definitely a part of what being at a boarding school is.
It's probably not as bad as it sounds. Experiencing it, it's like thinking about how it sounds. It sounds like you're just in this perpetual state of fear of like, oh my God, if I mess up, I'm going to leave. For Hotchkiss, at least, all the rules were very, very cut and dry. Now, there were instances where it would be, like you said, like a little gray, and you'd be like, why did this person get in trouble for that? But if you got in trouble for something, you probably knew what you were doing.
So the writer and director of Stella and the Spades actually went to a boarding school in New Jersey. It's called the Petty School. And she said they have a secret society called the Secret Society of 8, and you have to be invited in, and only by someone who is about to graduate. So similar to Stella and the Spades. So the whole point of the secret society was to do good things for people on campus. They would do things like, if someone has a game, for example, they would decorate their room. Would you say it's typical for someone who attended boarding schools to discuss secret societies in this way, like the way the director is being very forthcoming about not just the name, but what the actual society does?
No. No.
I don't know how old she is, but I'm assuming she's relatively removed from it. But it's sort of almost a self-ostracization.
By talking about it.
Yeah. Not only does it affect you, but it affects everyone at the school currently. Everyone who is an alumni or alumnus of the school or alumna. I wouldn't, I guess, go on air and be like, yeah, so, you know, Hotchkiss has the Secret Society of 8.
Right.
Yeah.
One more question that we ask all of our guests. It's your last night on Earth. Where are you eating and why?
Tokyo, because I love Tokyo and it had amazing food.
I would probably say New York City. I think a lot of the different types of cuisines I like to eat are available there with amazing different restaurants and chefs. And New York is just my favorite city in the world.
Thank you for listening to Impolite Conversation, the podcast, curated by the Iconoclast Dinner Experience. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Icon Dinner and on the Iconoclast Dinner Experience Facebook page. Let us know what you thought about this episode. Hit us on socials or send us feedback at press@iconoclastdinner.com. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our podcast, and we'd also love it if you rated and reviewed us.